Happens right here on the corner. In August of 1941, at the corner where City Savings Bank was, at Van Stop, there's a Louisiana school teacher. Her name is Elizabeth. She's 20. She's standing on the corner with her brother, his name is Ben. Before I read you how the book starts and show you what the book's about, I'm going to read you two actual quotes from two men who were here in 1941. First one, George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff, U.S. Army, spring 1941. I want the mistakes made down in Louisiana, not over in Europe. If it doesn't work, find out what we need to make it work. Second quote, August the 5th, 1941. Monday, I go to Louisiana. The old-timers say we're going to a god-awful spot complete with mud, malaria, mosquitoes, and misery. Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, many of you know the history of the Louisiana maneuvers. The first one was held in 1940, but the biggest one was held in August and September of 1941. 500,000 soldiers came in this area. I grew up, even though I was born long after that, I grew up hearing about it from all my family, so I've always been fascinated. So what I'm doing, I'm writing a historical fiction novel set during that time. And the name of the book, at this point, is called A Spent Bullet. A Spent Bullet. Let me read you the first page and you'll understand. Come on in, Ron. I'm looking forward to hearing this music in a minute.
Well, I wasn't expecting that.
I know it will be fun. Good music and good comments from Ron. Now listen, remember, what I'm telling you right now is happening right down here. Instead of log trucks and ambulances come by, there's been tanks coming by, and trucks full of soldiers, and horses. The 1941 maneuvers was the last time where horses were used as part of cavalry. And listen to this right here. Hey Clifford, how you doing?
Yeah.
Good to see you. I'm excited about Clifford and Sue Blackman singing today. And this is Thomas. This is Tommy's son. Where you at, Tommy? This is Thomas, and he's an excellent mandolin player. You're going to hear from him after I read this right here. Elizabeth Reed watched the last horse column pace by. Riding four abreast, the mounted cavalry soldiers looked sharp as row after row passed by on 1st Street in DeRidder. She smiled as her 10-year-old brother said, "This is better than a fair parade." And the horse column was followed by a long line of army trucks loaded with soldiers. Elizabeth saw a soldier's arm in motion and watched an object land at her feet on the sidewalk with a metallic clink. She glanced down before glancing up at the laughing soldiers in the truck from which it had been tossed. A blond soldier leaned out of the truck and shouted, "You're beautiful, write me!" And his northern accent grated like fingernails on the slate board in her classroom. Pointing at her feet, he yelled, "The bullet, write me!" The truck rattled across the railroad tracks, disappearing in the cloud of dust and smoke, and Elizabeth coughed and then mumbled, "Stupid Yankee." The exhaust burned her nostrils, and she blurted, "That's why I'm glad we live out in the country, not here in town." It was then her brother Ben saw the brass object at her feet, and he said, "What's that, Bethany?" And she said, "It looks like an empty cartridge with something stuck in it." One of the soldiers tossed it, and Ben knelt down to pick up the bullet, but was restrained by his sister Elizabeth. He protested, "Hey!" But the whistle of the 3 o'clock train coming from Leesville drowned out his words. As the train's whistle faded, the wolf whistles from the convoy's last truck took its place, with Elizabeth being the center of this attention. She tried clamping her hands over Ben's ears as he squirmed away, telling him through gritted teeth, "Sometimes what those soldiers say isn't fit for fresh ears." And he said, "My ears ain't fresh," he said, squirming away. And she said, "Ben Reed, you're impossible. It's arm, not ain't." And he says, "Well, either way, my ears ain't fresh." And before she could box his ears for his grammar, the train whistled again, and the long shriek of brakes drowned out any chance for further conversation. When the train stopped, she stuck her shook her head at the gawking soldiers in the remaining trucks, now blocked by the train, and repeated, "Stupid Yankees." Then added, "Our train's here. Let's go." Brother Ben said, "But what about the bullet?" And she said, "Leave it." She started across the street and looked back to see Ben kneeling on the sidewalk, tying his shoe. "Come on, Ben, $1's waiting on a dime." Her voice had an icy impatience in it, evidence as she scolded, "If you're coming to town with me, you're going to have to keep up with me." Holding firmly to her brother's arm, Elizabeth marched across the street toward the depot, adding as they crossed, "Ben, you always watch closely for those army trucks." Let me tell you how I've had fun with this. I go to high school classes, and I read that first chapter when I first started this book, and they give me ideas on where the plot could go. We've had more fun with it. A high school English class here, Melinda Shirley, who's one of the teachers at the high school, her class has adopted this project, and they're helping me research this book and giving me plot ideas. This is what was called a yoo-hoo bullet. In yoo-hoo, it was where soldiers during the maneuvers would take an empty M1 cartridge, they'd write their APO address. Most Blue Army soldiers that were in this area, their AP address was Raggle. And they'd write their unit number, and they'd put it on there, and when they would toss it at pretty girls. It was called yoo-hoo. It's like, yoo-hoo, look here. And it was finally outlawed when one day a soldier had a rock and he put his address on it, he hit an MP in the eye. In your military, you would know that would cause problems. And General Lear and General Kruger, who were the commanding generals, outlawed yoo-hoo. But in this book, this girl, Elizabeth, who's a school teacher from Bundy, Louisiana, which is out my way, and is here in town. We call it coming to town when you come to DeRidder. She has no interest in that bullet and any soldier, because she's not interested in soldiers. And she leaves the bullet. Well, you'll have to figure out or help me decide what happens to the bullet. But eventually, there's going to be a Yankee soldier and a Louisiana girl are going to get together. And the catalyst to it is here. And I've had more fun. This coming Monday, I go to Maryville. And I go to the United Methodist Senior Adults. And I'm going to let them just tell me their maneuver stories. And they have amazing stories. I want to tell this one, and then I'll stop. This one happened right behind here at the Ideal Drugstore. George Patton was all in this area during maneuvers. And one day he came into Ideal Drug, Miss Brownie LeRae, who many of you knew, was running the counter in there. And what they would do, they'd let 20 soldiers in at a time, so they wouldn't have them tear up the store, stealing everything. So the soldiers were in there, and General Patton, I mean, you know about Blood and Guts Patton. There was nothing shy about him. He comes in and gets some pipe tobacco and walks right up to the counter and puts his pipe tobacco down. And Mrs. LeRae said, "Sir, you'll have to get in the back of the line with everyone else." And he rose up and said, "Ma'am, do you know who I am?" And she said, "I really don't care who you are. You're in my store. You want your pipe tobacco, you get in the back of the line behind those boys." And I can imagine the boys trying to keep them laughing as General Patton got in the back of the line and waited to pay for his pipe tobacco. That is a story that happened. It may be embellished just a little, but those are the kind of things that happen during the maneuvers. And especially the younger generation, they know nothing about the maneuvers. So I'm enjoying this book. It's going to be about a 90,000 word book. I've written about 60,000 of it in draft, and I'm still gathering stories. So it's the fun of writing. Now, I'm ready to